Hi, my name's Lyndon Poskitt. I've been riding a motorcycle around the world for the last 4 years, filming a travel documentary called Races to Places. I've travelled 5 continents, 57 countries and over 180,000 kilometres. And in that time, I've raced 7 international cross-country races, including 2 Dakar rallies. I've been supported by Motox Oils of Switzerland since the concept of my journey over 4 years ago. And today, I find myself in Cape Town, South Africa, preparing for the final leg of my journey, where I will ride back to the UK, where it all started 4 years ago. So let me introduce you to the bike. This is Basil Bike, named after my late grandfather. It's a KTM factory rally bike, and it's been adapted by myself for adventure travels. It's a 730cc single cylinder. As you can see, it's ready for a little bit of work. I'm going to rebuild the entire engine. I'm going to rebuild the whole chassis. I'm going to change all the bearings, re-grease everything, check everything. I'm going to service the suspension. We're going to change all the fluids on the bike, and we're going to go right through the electrical system. It's going to be difficult to get parts in some places in Africa, so we want to make sure it's ready for the journey ahead. So let's get started. Okay, I'm just going to talk through some of the products that I've used on the rebuild of the chassis on the bike. And to start with, let's talk about grease. So there's some parts on the bike, the steering stem bearings, the swing arm linkage, the suspension linkage underneath, the sliders on the calipers that need greasing. And some of them are highly loaded areas, especially like the linkage on the shock. But for those areas on the bike, I grease them with Grease 2000 from Motox. It's a calcium-based grease, it's highly effective. It's got really good adhesion properties, so the grease sticks to the components that you want lubricating and stays there. And best of all for me is that it's resistant to water, so it doesn't get washed away with water. So when I'm traveling, going through river crossings and water crossings and all the things that I throw at the bike, riding in adverse weather, it stays in place. So Grease 2000, that's the grease that I use. Moving on to the brake systems, the brake fluid that I use is this. The best thing about this is its high temperature resistance. So when I'm racing, like in the Dakar Rally or something like that, it's very effective. I can't remember ever having a brake failure due to fluid. That said, I like to keep it changed regularly, especially if my rear brake in racing goes through extreme cycles of temperature. It's important to keep the systems clean. On my travel bike, it goes for months sometimes. It's important to change it now and again. Keep the systems clean so the dirt doesn't cause excessive wear on the components inside your braking system. Moving on to the clutch system on my bike, it's a hydraulic clutch on my bike and it requires this mineral oil. It's important that you check whether it's a mineral oil based system or a brake fluid based system before you use to make sure you use the right product. But I use this mineral oil, and just like the brake systems, I like to change it regularly to make sure it stays in its best condition and keeps the systems inside in good shape. Moving on to this Joker 440, there's only really one area that I use this on the bike, and that's to unseize things. So I have one particular area on the bike, which is the steering stem pin up on the steering damper, which is open to the elements, and it gets salt and moisture in there, and it's also dissimilar metals, and it tends to corrode and seize up. And this is really effective for soaking into those gaps freeing it up, lubricating it, leaves behind a nice film and some anti-corrosion protection. So I like to use that on those kind of like hinge components and stuff like that. The next one is one of my favourite products, Power Brake Clean. Everyone knows this as brake cleaner in the paddocks and racing, etc. And I use this for cleaning brakes off, brake discs, brake calipers. I use it for cleaning engine cases, well, anything to be honest I use it on. And it's really effective at cleaning off tar, grease, oils, dirt, grime and everything. And it doesn't leave behind any film or greasy substance on the surface. So you can actually use it for cleaning plastics and bodywork as well. It doesn't deteriorate rubbers and seals and plastics, so it's safe to use, and I use it for putting stickers on, things like that. It's really effective. I've gone through 3 tubs of this, three cans of this while rebuilding the Basel bike here, and it's something that I use an awful lot of. I don't carry it on my travels. I like to keep it in my box for racing, and it's in my workshop all the time, but super effective, very, very useful. And finally, let's talk about the coolant. This is the Motox Coolant that I use in the engine. It's an ethylene glycol based coolant, and its primary function is to keep the engine cool in extreme conditions. And if you think about some of the conditions that I race in, for example through the deserts, in the desert racing, and even travelling, go through some extreme temperatures, every day my engine would not survive without this. But it's not just about keeping the engine cool, it's about keeping it clean inside the cooling system. So this does things that people generally don't think about, like it prevents limescale from building up, it prevents corrosion on aluminium engines. It's specifically formulated to be used inside aluminium water-cooled engines. Prevents limescale from building up, and it prevents it from freezing. So when I'm in extreme conditions, like when I'm in my home in the UK in the winter, and also when I'm in places like Siberia and travelling, leave my bike overnight, I don't want it to freeze. So it's got effective properties for antifreeze as well, and protection against frost. So this takes care of my engine, the cooling system, keeps it nice and clean, and looks after it for me in all conditions. And that's it, just an overview of some of the products that I've used here in Cape Town, refreshing the chassis of my motorcycle for the next part of my journey. So let's talk a little bit about engine oil. There's 3 key things for me when selecting engine oil. One, it's important to have the correct specification. The specification is dictated by the manufacturer, typically of the engine. In my case, the oil recommended for this particular engine is Motox Cross Power. The specification is on the back here, typically in an API spec or similar, and you can find that in the manual or the owner's manual of your motorcycle. It's important to use the correct specification, especially if you want your engine to last the longest. This oil, this Cross Power 1060, is specifically designed for racing conditions in 4-stroke engines with wet multiplate clutches, just like this one. I use this oil in my Dakar race bike, I use it in my 4-stroke enduro bike, I use it in my adventure travel bike that I ride around the world and race, this bike here. So that's the recommended oil for me. Another thing that you've got to consider when selecting the right oil is the viscosity or the thickness of the oil and how it acts at different temperatures. And that's what this is here, the 10W60. The first number is how the oil operates at a lower temperature, so typically ambient temperature, start-up temperature. And the bigger number is how it acts at hotter temperatures, like 100 degrees when it's under operating conditions. And it's important to get the right grade for the internal components of your engine. So if you've got the right specification, you've got the right grade, and you've got a good quality oil, because the quality of the oil you're going to use is important, especially if you want your engine to last the longest possible, then those are the 3 key things that that will give you the longevity that you want out of your engine. Now, I've done 180,000 kilometres with this particular engine, and I've just rebuilt the engine. And when I was looking inside it, it's really amazing how little wear there are on components. I've changed the oil in my world travels 30 times, and I can think at least 28 of the times I've managed to get Motox Crosspower 1060. So I've used it for my whole trip, and I was really impressed with the condition of the engine inside. So very few changes inside. I've changed bearings more for a preventative point of view than anything, and I'm looking forward to the next 100,000 with this engine. Right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about fork maintenance and how I've maintained my forks as I've been travelling around the world. I've probably serviced my forks only about 6 times in my travels on this bike, which I'm a little bit ashamed of, to be honest, but it's quite hard to find places to have it done properly or find the right product to do it. I've been fortunate enough to have some people help me along the way to service the forks at a professional outfit. Other times I've had to do it myself. One I can think of was in Mongolia, where I serviced the forks myself. It's important to select a good quality oil for your fork. There's a number of things that you have to think about inside a fork that typically don't. These things are sliding components inside each other, and you have to think about coefficient of friction. So you want the best coefficient of friction you can get to reduce stiction, and also they have air and oil inside them. And what happens is you get a mixture of the two, and so you want an oil which separates the air from the oil as quickly as possible and also reduces the amount of formation. So when selecting an oil, you need to select a very good professional quality grade oil for your forks. The fork oil does a lot more than you think. When racing, and for the majority of my world travels, I've been using this Motox Racing fork oil. And when you look at the spec sheet, it's clear to see the development that went into creating such a special oil to allow these modern day suspension forks to work at their best in the most extreme environments. On my travels, I've had to service my forks numerous times, but thankfully the internal components have always been in good shape, meaning that all I've had to do is change the seals, put fresh fluid in and continue riding. And I think that's a really good testimony to a quality fork oil. So here we are to talk about air filter maintenance, and this is something that I've been wanting to discuss for a long time. For me, air filter maintenance is one of the most important maintenance aspects of an off-road motorcycle, especially used in extreme conditions. It's so important to make sure you've got a clean, correctly oiled air filter fitted correctly on your motorcycle so you don't have excessive wear on your engine. If any dirt goes through the top end of your engine because of poor air filter maintenance, you're going to get excessive valve wear, excessive piston ring wear, excessive cylinder wear, and these are all costly, so you want to avoid them. And it's really easy, just take care of your air filter properly. So, when you take your dirty air filter off, it's probably going to look something like this. It's pretty grim. All the dirt should be on the outside. If you have a quick look on the inside, there's no dirt on there, it's nice and clean. That's a good indication that the air filter has been oiled correctly and installed correctly, and it's been working correctly. Also check the inside of your airbox. If there's any dirt inside your airbox, it's a good indication that you've got either a leaking intake system or your filter's not working correctly, filtering the air accordingly. So let's start by discussing how to clean it properly. On here there should be oil, filter oil. You need to remove all the dirt and the old filter oil out of the air filter. Now we're talking specifically about foam filters here. Foam filters are the most effective filter for extreme environments like off-road racing, dusty environments particularly, and it's what I choose to use for adventure travel, and it's one of the best. So to clean it, you need to use a proper filter cleaner. While petrol may be effective at getting the oil and a lot of the dirt out of your filter, it's also very effective at destroying the foam and the glue that holds together your foam filter. I'd highly recommend using a proper air filter cleaner that's designed for cleaning foam filters. Something like this Motox Bio dirt remover. That's what we're going to use today, and I would clean it by fully submersing it in the cleaner and rinsing it, wringing it, squashing it, squeezing it until you've got all the dirt out of the filter. And even when you're done with the actual cleaner, filter cleaner, empty the sink or container and then fill it again with plain water, rinse it again and double check that there's no bits. Only when the water is clean do you know that you've got everything out of the filter. You know you've got a happy clean filter. Now, Motox provide a filter cleaning kit which comes with containers to do everything in. I really like those when I'm in my garage at home, but when I'm travelling typically don't have one, so I use a sink or an ice cream container or something like that to do the job. Once you've got it nice and clean, it's going to be wet, so you need to squeeze as much water as you can out of the filter. It's important not to wring it or twist it and damage the foam, but once you've got as much water out as you can, hang it up to dry. When you hang it up to dry, take a few hours depending on the conditions, but once it's dry, only then can you consider oiling the filter. Now, oiling the filter is a really critical part. If you don't oil a foam filter, it's only going to filter large particles, and all the small ones are just going to go straight through the foam. How the oil works is, the oil sticks to the foam itself, and while leaving the pores of the foam open for the air to travel through. As the dust goes through it, it hits the foam that's got oil on it and the dirt sticks to it, so the fine dust particles stick to it and the air still continues to go through. So it's absolutely important to have it oiled correctly. Now for that, there's many different products on the market. There is liquid product. So this is what I prefer to use. If I can get my hands on this, I'll always use the liquid form filter cleaner. You can also get the aerosol form cleaner. Both are very similar products, the way that you apply it is different. So the way that I prefer to do it is take the filter once it's clean and dry and put some filter oil, liquid filter oil, in a container. Fully submerse the foam filter and squash it down until all the air's out, which means the whole thing is covered in oil. Then remove it, and it's important to wring it out. Squash it as much as you can to get as much of the oil out of the filter as possible. Don't twist it, tear it, pull it, damage it, anything. Just squeeze as much as you can, as hard as you can, to get the excess oil out. It's really important not to have too much oil on your filter. If you do, it can restrict the airflow and it can also leak out all over your airbox, which is a disaster. So to keep everything right, you want just the right amount of oil on your filter. Now there's lots of different methods of doing it. The one I've just explained is what I prefer to do when I'm in a workshop or my garage, but when I'm out in the field, I just carry a small amount of liquid filter oil and I put it inside a bag with the foam filter and squeeze the bag to spread the oil all over the filter. So that's just another method. That's a similar method with the aerosol. You would spray the aerosol all over the outside of the filter and the inside if you want to, but all over the filter, and then you'd squeeze it to get it right inside the foam element, so inside the bits you can't see, so that it's fully covered, every part of the foam filter. Once your filter's oiled, then you can install it back on your motorcycle, taking special care that it's seated properly onto the mated surface, you've got no gaps, and that it's bolted down or clipped in position correctly. And if you follow that process, I've had endless hundreds of thousands of kilometres without any problems on my dirt bikes and excessive wear. Look after your air filter and your engine will be taken care of in terms of dirt going through it, and that's the best you can ask for. So air filter maintenance, that's how I do mine. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about chain maintenance. Chain maintenance is something that's really important in any motorcycle that's driven by a chain. Specifically, we're going to concentrate on O-ring chains, X-ring chains, sealed chains, because that's what I use on all my bikes. But when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about enduro, rally, adventure riding, long distance stuff, and I'm going to bring in my experiences of how and when to service your chain. So first of all, let's talk about cleaning it. How to clean it? Well, if you've got the opportunity to clean it, you don't always, like for example Malimoto at Dakar, sometimes you don't have time. It's still important to lubricate it, but you don't have time to clean it. But if you do have time to clean your chain, use a product that's specially designed for it, that's not going to damage your O-rings on your chain, and that's going to be most effective at getting as much dirt off as possible. I use this Motox Chain Clean. Spray it on liberally on the outside, all around the rollers and everything, and then leave it for a few minutes. Wipe it off with a rag wherever you can. Bits that you can't get to with a rag, use a chain cleaning brush or a toothbrush or something can be effective. Just be careful you don't push anything into behind the O-rings, you don't want that. So nice and light work on the chain to get it as clean as you can. Once the chain's clean, or if you don't have a chance to clean it, let's talk about lubricating it. As a minimum, when I'm racing or when I'm travelling on my adventure bike, I like to lubricate my chain, re-grease the chain every day at least, as a minimum. Sometimes more. In extreme wet or muddy conditions I'll do it more. But the lubricant that I choose is this off-road chain lube from Motox. Why do I choose the off-road one? Because I ride all my bikes off-road, and the off-road stuff is specifically developed for extreme harsh conditions, dusty, muddy environments, and I tend to ride in those, even though I sometimes spend days riding on the road. I still use that same chain lube. But when I'm racing or I'm closer to home, I like to carry this little mini-me with me. And this is really cool just to chuck in your backpack or your tank bag and just to have with you. And you can refill it from the big one, so that's a really cool little thing that Motox do. So how to apply it then? Well, on an O-ring chain, they're sealed and the pins have actually got grease inside the chain, and the O-rings are there, or the X-rings are there to stop the grease getting out and dirt getting in, and they're highly effective at that. But there's other parts of your chain that don't have that grease on them. For example, the rollers on the centre of the chain that run around your sprockets. This is one of the most crucial areas to lubricate. So when I'm lubricating my chain, priority one is lubricate the rollers on the centre of the chain. Secondary is the O-rings, because all you're doing really is putting a little bit of lubrication on the O-rings so that it seeps in and keeps it nice and lubed so they don't dry out over time. And the final, and not even a priority, is the side links. You don't need to spray chain lube on the side links. All it does is attract dirt to it, and you just don't need it. So how much to put on? Well, I like to do a full rotation of the chain, lubricate the rollers on the outside, then on the inside, and a little bit on the O-rings as well. Don't put too much on. If you do, it just throws off, or it attracts, excessive just attracts dirt. Now, in dusty conditions, sometimes it's not worth putting additional chain lube on. If you do it on the night before, for example, if I'm racing in sandy conditions, if you do it the night before, the chain lube works its way into the chain and it will do its job for the following day on the inside. Although it looks like your chain is dry, on the inside it will still be lubricated, and that's what you need to focus on. So that's how I look after my chains on racing and on races to places. If you look after your chain, it'll look after you. I've had up to 27,000 kilometres out of a 520 chain on an 80 horsepower bike carrying luggage, and I think that's pretty impressive. But also, when I've not looked after a chain, I've seen massive deteriorations. They're not cheap. Look after your chain and it'll look after you. So riding my motorcycle day in, day out, whether it be Dakar Rally or riding around the world on races to places, as you can imagine, your helmet gets pretty stinky inside and pretty grafted on the outside too. So I just want to run through how I take care of it on the road. First of all, let's talk about the inside. I use this helmet care from Motox. It's a small tin, you can keep it with you, and it's amazing the difference it makes. It's antibacterial, it's deodorizing, and when your helmet gets really bad after like weeks of riding, you just spray it on the inside, leave it to take action, and then wipe it off. It's dead easy and it's super effective, and it's like putting a new helmet on when you can't wash your liners, etc. So it's a really nice product to have with you. For the outside and sometimes for the bike as well, Motox do this quick cleaner. Super nice because you don't need to add water to it. You can just spray it on and wipe it off. Not necessarily when I'm racing do I carry these, but like to have them in my toolboxes and stuff so that I can take care of my helmet. One thing that I do carry with me is these Visor Cleans, whether it's for my goggles or whether it's for my helmet visor to keep the visor clean. I carry these little sachets, just put them in my tank bag, and you just lay it on over the top of the visor, leave it to take action for a few minutes, wipe it off, dry cloth, don't scratch your visor, and it's the best way to take care of it. So these little Visor Clean sachets are real helpful to have. And the last product that I wanted to talk about is this Protect spray. This is what I use on leather gloves, on my boots, on my Gore-Tex clothing, outer layers, etc. And it's used for water repellency and to basically replenish it back to how it should be and take care of it. Keeps it soft and supple, keeps it waterproof, and also allows it to breathe. So Protect spray is what I would recommend for clothing and what I've been using for the last 4 years. And that's it really. That's how I look after my protective clothing, whether I'm back home, whether I'm racing, or whether I'm out adventuring around the world. A lot of people always congratulate me on how nice my bikes look, especially after I've done work on them or rebuilt them. But I don't have any kind of superhuman powers. I'm very meticulous in how I clean it, and I have some special products to help me make them look great. So I'm going to share with you what I use and how I take my bike from looking like this to looking like it's like new. First of all, when I clean the bike, I use this Motox Moto Clean. You spray it on, spray it all over the bike. When the bike's cool, make sure it's cool. Spray it on all over the bike, leave it for up to 5 minutes, and then wash it off. Wash the bike thoroughly with a sponge, and it really does have an amazing effect on it to get the thing as clean as possible. It's biodegradable and environmentally neutral, which is nice. And once I've got the bike cleaned, then I focus on getting some finishing product on it. Now on my enduro bikes that get scratched up and bashed and scraped, and my rally bikes too, I like to use this silicone spray. It's really good at protecting the plastics and rubbers and metalwork on the bike. It leaves a lasting film on there. It's actually really effective at making the scratched up old plastics look better than they should, and it puts a nice glossy finish on it. It's not always effective to use this though. On matte finishes, for example, it's not the best. You should use something else for that. But I'm going to also talk to you about Moto Shine. Now, for my bikes that have got panels and paintwork and I want to get a really glossy, high finish on them, I use this Moto Shine. It's really good. Apply it on the cloth, rub it over it. It puts a long-lasting, shiny, glossy finish on the bike, and it also provides an anti-static surface and also allows the water to bead off it, so it's really nice when you finish off with that. So there's just a few products that I use to help me keep my bikes looking good as new.